Do you use visual aids in your presentations? How do you describe your charts and graphs? I will give you useful mama phrases you can use to describe your charts and graphs naturally and professionally. Hi, I'm Keiko from English-Empowered. In the 一言 mama phrase lessons, I introduce you to useful English expressions that are natural and appropriate for professional settings. Today, we will first go over some vocabulary for charts and graphs. Then I will give you 3 一言 mama phrases to describe these charts. Finally, you will practice describing charts by using the vocabulary and the 一言 mama phrases you've learned today. Before we start, make sure you have a pen and a sticky note ready. And participate actively by repeating after me and practicing using the mama phrases in the output training. Are you ready? Let's get started. So when you have data, the first thing you probably do is to put it on a table. You know, the thing that has rows and columns. Then when you present the data, you usually use some kind of chart. Chart is an umbrella term for any visual representation or drawing of the data. You use a chart to show the data in a more simple way that's easy for the audience to understand. There's so many different kinds of chart. Pie chart, Venn diagram, bubble chart, line graph, scatter plot, bar graph, grid, fader chart, timeline. But you actually don't need to know all these names. In presentations, native speakers don't use all these names. They usually use more general terms. So I'm going to show you 6 names you should remember and that you will most likely use in your presentations. The first name you should remember is table. You use it when you want to show raw data, the original data you haven't touched. Next one looks like this or this. They are graphs. Any chart that has the x-axis and the y-axis is called a graph. There are different kinds of graphs, but in a presentation, you normally don't say, look at this bar graph, or this line graph shows. It sounds more natural to say, this graph. Good for English learners, right? Just like graph, you can refer to this chart, or this chart as simply chart. But there's one type of chart native speakers tend to use the specific name of, and that's this, a pie chart. It looks like a pie and shows how the whole thing is divided into different parts. So if it's a pie chart, say pie chart. If it's another type of chart, say chart. And as I've mentioned earlier, chart can mean any visual representation. So if you don't remember the specific name of the chart, you can simply say this chart. Now this one is called a timeline. You can show multiple events in a chronological order. The last one, something like this or this, is called a diagram or a figure. This is another broad term. If it's not a graph or chart that you know, just call it a diagram or a figure. So the 6 names you should remember are table, graph, chart, pie chart, timeline, diagram, or figure. Now you know what to call your charts. In the last lesson, we looked at how to direct your audience's attention to a specific area on a visual aid. Today, you're going to learn to describe what it is that your audience is looking at. For important tips to remember when describing a chart, watch the other short video I've made for you. Now let's take a look at this week's Hitokoto Mama phrases. I will show you 3 useful mama phrases to describe your chart. Take out your sticky note and write "Describe a chart" at the top. To describe a chart by highlighting key information, here are the natural and professional phrases native speakers use. Hitokoto mama phrase number 1. This chart shows. Write this down on your sticky note. Now repeat after me. This chart shows. This chart shows. In chart, you put the type of chart you've learned earlier, like pie chart or graph. Or if you don't want to use the specific name, you can simply say this chart. Then after this chart shows, say your point, what you want your audience to see in the chart. It's a simple but straightforward way of telling your audience what your chart shows. Let's use this chart as an example. Here's how you can use this mama phrase. You might think Americans are big coffee drinkers, but this pie chart shows about 2/3 of Americans drink 3 or fewer cups of coffee a day. You see how I highlighted key information and summarized instead of reading everything out? Let's practice saying the example sentence together. Repeat. This pie chart shows about 2/3 of Americans drink only 3 or fewer cups of coffee a day. Great! Hitokoto mama phrase number 2. As you can see from this chart, or as you can see, write it down on your sticky note. Now repeat. As you can see from this chart. As you can see, you start your sentence with this mama phrase and follow it with your point. Let me show you how to use it with an example. Do you see the graph on the screen? As you can see, the size of American households is slowly starting to grow after over 200 years of a steady decrease. Because I already said, do you see the graph? I decided not to say, as you can see from this graph, and just said, as you can see, because it would have sounded kind of repetitive. Now, this is a great example of why it's important for you to highlight the key information you want your audience to see. If you don't, they might not see this little portion of the chart and think, oh, American families have been getting smaller and smaller. But if you say the size of American households is slowly starting to grow after over 200 years of a steady decrease, that will completely change what they see in the chart. Back to the mama phrase. Repeat after me. As you can see, the size of American households is slowly starting to grow after over 200 years of a steady decrease. Excellent! Now, 一言 mama phrase number 3. If you look at this chart, you will see, write it down on your sticky note. Now repeat. If you look at this chart, you will see. If you look at this chart, you will see. Does this mama phrase sound familiar? It's actually one of the mama phrases you learned in the previous lesson to direct your audience's attention to a specific area on a visual aid. Like, if you look at the top right corner, you will see a table. With today's mama phrase, you are explaining what information the audience will understand by looking at a chart. Let's look at this chart. How would you describe this with the mama phrase you've just learned? Here's what I might say. If you look at this diagram, you will see active learning, such as teaching others and practicing by doing, helps students remember information better than learning passively. Did you come up with something like that? Repeat after me. If you look at this diagram, you will see active learning helps students remember information better than learning passively. Nice job! Here's omake information. The first and the third mama phrases. This chart shows, and if you look at this chart, you will see. You can also use to introduce the general topic of the chart. So for example, instead of making your point saying, this chart shows that most Americans only drink 3 or fewer cups of coffee a day, you could also say, this chart shows how many cups of coffee Americans drink per day. Or, if you look at this chart, you will see the number of cups of coffee Americans drink in a day. So if you want to introduce the general topic of the chart to your audience, that's how you can do it. So again, this week's 3 hitokoto mama phrases are, this chart shows, as you can see from this chart, if you look at this chart, you will see. Keep the sticky note with you. Now it's time for the output training. You're gonna see a chart. Use the vocabulary and the hitokoto mama phrases you've learned today to describe the chart. Because I want you to focus on using the vocabulary and the mama phrases, I will give you the content of the description. So for example, when you see this, you say, this pie chart shows that more than a quarter of Americans only have a cup of coffee a day. You have 10 seconds. Ready? Let's start. Now, for the last one, I want you to describe the chart you see in your own words. Use the chart vocabulary and one of the mama phrases and highlight one piece of information you want your audience to pay attention to. Ready? How did it go? Post your answer in the comment section and I will check it. In this lesson, you'll learn how to describe a chart by highlighting key information. Let's review the 3 hitokoto mama phrases we went over today. This chart shows, as you can see from this chart, if you look at this chart, you will see you did a great job today. Now put the sticky note with these mama phrases somewhere you see often. Your laptop, your cell phone, your office desk, and use them throughout the week. And remember to put your answer to the last question in the output training in the comment section. If you go to English-Empowered blog, you will find extra mama phrases to describe a chart. I put the link in the description below. Thank you so much for joining me. See you in the next lesson.